What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Ramageddon is here, at least according to a headline for a report that is pointing to some tough times coming up for Nintendo and Sony, both of them facing some hurdles when it comes to current hardware and next gen. We'll go over exactly what's happening here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Square with Final Fantasy VII Remake, that trilogy now going multi-platform, and actually the director really talking about what exactly changes and if quality goes down more and more platforms that you throw in. And we'll also be talking about a game that I'm sure will get .hack fans very excited because turns out that franchise is indeed coming back. All that and more. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. Guys, we're every weekday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time, going over the world of gaming, trying to keep you up to date with all the stuff happening. So even if you don't get a notification in the morning, just know there's probably a video here for you. And we're going to start today with the Virtual Boy. While it did ship out to basically everyone yesterday, the application went live throughout the day and even night for different regions, but right now it should be up and available, provided you have the accessories, whether it's the $100 Virtual Boy replica or the $25 cardboard version. You actually need it to play. And that was something people were curious about. Well, you can see some examples here. Game Explained did post an entire video showcasing what happens if you go into the application when it's docked, and it simply tells you to play Virtual Boy Nintendo Classics, remove the console from the dock. That's right, they don't work when you're hooked up to the TV, which is weird because obviously Virtual Boy games can work. There are emulators right now where it functions fine. Sure, you don't have that depth, that 3D depth, but you don't need it necessarily to play the games. You can even emulate those on the 3DS that, yes, can give you that 3D depth effect, but if you turn it off completely, it still works. Again, you lose some of the effect, and there are some games that really benefit from it, but it's still a thing. So this is just, to me, Nintendo doing Nintendo things, and that is pretty annoying, but maybe in the future they'll decide to change their mind on it, at least for now, though. Yes, it looks like you either need the $25 or $100 Virtual Boy replica and accessories in order to use that part of NSO. Also, we're a few weeks away from Pokopia at this time, and it seems like the closer we get to its release, the more and more buzz I see online around this and how the interest is really building here. So one part, though, has to do with the multiplayer side, and it, yes, aligning more and more towards what Minecraft does, and that includes the multiplayer when it comes to a shared island or shared world experience. This we can see, this is over on Eurogamer, saying you can either visit a host's main island or develop a blank one that's completely separate from the story mode progress. That second one allows players to work together in order to fully develop and reshape it into the peaceful village of their dreams. The important part, though, even if the host isn't playing, everyone can join in and play. Now, they're calling this Cloud Island, and it's basically like Minecraft's private persistent servers. But this really leans into, like, even the streaming world where people will get together and they'll do all streams around building up this world in Minecraft that is persistent online, even if, again, the person who created it isn't there. So this is something that I think is really big for Pokopia. And I do wonder if it's that situation where, I mean, I figure it's going to sell, but I do wonder if this is a situation where it's going to kind of sneak up on us and be this massive, overwhelming success, because it does feel very much like they're modeling it around things like a Minecraft, but also leaning into the community side and being more open to multiplayer than we've seen before with some of these Pokemon games where there are strict limitations around competitive nature and trading. That necessarily doesn't exist here. So I'm curious how Pokopia is going to do when it launches here, actually the first week of March. It's coming up quick. Oh, and we have an update on the Steam Deck out of stock situation that in some regions, specifically the US, is just out of stock completely. They added a little footnote to it, you can see. Wario64 went ahead and clipped this and put it up online, saying the Steam Deck OLED may be out of stock intermittently in some regions due to memory and storage shortages. They also mentioned that, of course, the LCD 256GB is no longer in production, and this was all very much expected. It's just Valve didn't give any kind of update. I'm sure people were reaching out even, and that's probably why they added this little footnote, but Yeah, it's the memory shortage, the DRAM squeeze right now. It's on and it's affecting the Steam Deck and certainly the Steam Machine, as we know that they have more or less delayed it. It's pushed back a bit further into the year from when they wanted to launch it. And here's hoping they can hit a price point they wanted as well, because if the price is too high on that, it's really going to struggle in this market. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a report out of Bloomberg. And it's very important to note Bloomberg because when they put out reports around different companies, investors certainly prioritize and pay attention. All right, Bloomberg basically speaks to them. So when they talk about Sony and Nintendo facing some struggles here with not only their current system with the Switch 2, but also a future system with the PlayStation 6 and potential handheld, yeah, this could really spell trouble for both going into the future with price increases or even full-on delays. We'll start with Sony, though, here for the PlayStation 6 and plans for next generation. This is from Bloomberg, where they say, in an article about the ongoing surge in memory prices, VGC citing Bloomberg here, Bloomberg says the upcoming bottleneck of memory production will cause huge ramifications across the tech industry. Citing sources familiar with Sony's strategic thinking, the article claims that Sony Group Corp is now considering pushing back the debut of its next PlayStation console to 2028 or even 2029. And again, the funny part is this report gets out there. Sounds like bad news. You're like, wow, that we're going to go until 2028 or 2029 until the next generation starts. We're going to be in an 8-year or 9-year generation with the PlayStation 5. People were actually happy to read that. And a lot of that does have to do with people still looking at the PlayStation 5 and like, okay, it's going to get going eventually. And I understand there was a long cross-gen period, but we have seen games come in and do some impressive things using the SSD on the PlayStation 5, and even just like the quality of life of not really having loading screens. That is a big thing that certainly gets taken for granted, but even streaming in assets for open world games, and again, that kind of stuff is something that should be more noticeable, but it's just diminishing returns, especially on the visual side. It's apparent at this point where people are like, yeah, it looks a bit better, I guess. And going into the PlayStation 6, the things that we've heard about that's really the focus right now for Sony and Mark Cerny and a lot of their engineers, ray tracing being a big one, but also just upscaling, different techniques in order to take an image that is lower resolution and move it up to 4K or even 8K while retaining the current frame rate of 60 or even 120. So when you hear that kind of stuff, you don't necessarily go, wow, I can't wait for that. You might go, hey, you know what? The PlayStation 5, or if you have the PlayStation 5 Pro, it's good enough right now. And that's the thing. Sony can, of course, hang out and keep selling more PlayStation 5 systems because the PS6 isn't going to be cheaper than the PS... It's not going to be cheaper, I think, than the PS5 Pro. I don't know how that's possible when the current rumor around specs is that Sony might be tapping 30 gigabytes of GDDR7. You look around at video cards that are $1,000 or more, they don't even have that kind of video RAM on board. So I'm not really sure how Sony would make that happen in a PlayStation 6, honestly, in the next year or two. So 2029 sounds kind of feasible. The only issue, of course, comes down to where are the games in production? Because if games right now are targeting the PlayStation 6, expecting 2027 or even 2028 at the latest, what are they going to do when the game's ready to go, but the system isn't? I mean, sure, maybe it's cross-gen and they put it on PS5 and then they put it on PS6 later, but that does kind of knock some of the wind out of their sails for momentum when they were going to be ready to go for a big first-party launch of a system to help push units. And then there's the whole partnership with AMD, as they may be ready to go before Sony in this rate, and it's trying to line all of this up and kind of thread the needle for software and hardware. That's tough. So I'm really curious to see how Sony works all of this out for the home console side. But then there's the whole handheld as well that's rumored to have 24 gigabytes of RAM. And we see the current price of PC gaming handhelds being $1,000 or more in that range of specs. And this is tough, like figuring out the price and then also the performance and where they want this to sit for what might end up being a 7 or 8 year cycle from that point. It's going to be interesting to see how Sony works this out, but me personally, I don't mind if they hang out and wait a bit as well. Even though new hardware is exciting, I'm still kind of waiting to see this PSSR 2.0 update that is going to hit at some point in 2026. And you know what? I wouldn't mind getting a solid 2 years out of the PS5 Pro before we get to the PlayStation 6. So I'm kind of on like 2028, 2029. I'm on that bandwagon right now. So I don't know if Sony's going to comment on any of this, but maybe if the handheld come out first and then they'll work on the console. It's a messy situation for Sony and actually also Nintendo. And we'll move over to that next with Nintendo. Yeah, having their own issues when it comes to current generation with the Switch 2. Not necessarily being able to sell these systems. As we know, it is the fastest selling system by just about all metrics, as we hear constantly out of these different reports each month. They've had their first holiday season. It launched in June, and now here we go rolling into a new fiscal year for Nintendo by the end of March. Seems like, though, they could be running into potential issues when it comes to price increases for the system. We've already talked about this a bit, and Nintendo was pressed heavily by investors because even they know, and that's one of the reasons they were pressing so much, they can see what's happening around the gaming industry, and it doesn't look great for lowering the price or even keeping the price of these systems the same. So this we can see from the same article at Bloomberg, where they say close rival Nintendo, which contributed to the surplus demand in 2025 after its new Switch 2 console drove storage card purchases, is also contemplating raising the price of that device in 2026. People familiar with its plans said. Sony and Nintendo representatives didn't respond to requests for comment. So with Bloomberg, I've noticed that they tend to have communication at the supply level, and it's possible they get feedback from Nintendo based on where parts prices are and how they would try to accommodate that. It doesn't necessarily have to be. The price of the system is going up, just outright. There are other things that can happen to try to mitigate costs from one sector to another. So I've been looking at NSO as a potential target for Nintendo to raise the price. Nintendo, I'm sure, looks at that and goes, we have hundreds of older titles on here, an entire library, and you get cloud saves, and you get to play online, which it's still crazy that pay to play online is something that's viewed as a positive or a benefit, but it is. Still, though, they're going to look at that and say, that's $50 a year. We're going to move that up to $70 a year. Or even like the base $20, that's $30 now. Things like that are ways that they can sort of get around raising the price of the system. But as we've seen, of course, with other companies, that subscription service, it's not going to come down in price. So once they move it up once, they have to be sure they're ready to do it, because I don't think it's again going to be getting any cheaper in the future, because then they may end up with a subscription service that doesn't balance it out, and then they have to raise the price of the hardware anyway. And look, Nintendo right now, I'm sure they do not want to raise the price of the system because they're still in that user acquisition phase, and they're trying to convince people who have a Switch 1 to go to the Switch 2. And if that system keeps getting more and more expensive, it becomes a $500 system or a $550 system with a bundle. And then you see the price of games where Nintendo keeps trying to figure out ways to put expansions on top of the games and DLC, and those turn into $60 to $80 games. And you know what I'm saying? It just becomes more and more expensive to where people will say, you know what, I'll wait for a while and see if prices come down. And then when you know it, they don't go down, they continue to go up. It's an appreciable asset at this point to get a game system, which is very weird because it's never been like that, but these are strange times. So I've kind of anticipated the idea of price increases for Sony and Nintendo this year. We'll see. It's going to be tough. We'll know more when we get into next fiscal year, as Nintendo was very careful when they were talking about price increases to mostly point towards fiscal year, not calendar year. So we'll see if maybe their RAM allotment is enough to get them through. Maybe there's some crazy surge of RAM supply all of a sudden because contracts fall through in the AI sector. But right now, it's not looking great, and I would anticipate, personally, the Switch 2 being probably $500 by the time we get to the holiday in 2026. Next up, let's talk about .hack, because CyberConnect 2 did announce a brand new entry. And this is really exciting for .hack fans because it seemed like whatever CyberConnect 2 was going to announce, it was going to be a new IP. It wasn't going to be .hack. But then it was. And in fact, we can see over on Gematsu, they say CyberConnect 2 has announced .hack 0, a new action RPG in the .hack series. They just say for quote-unquote home consoles. They say it's 10 years in the making. I'm trying to figure out the way they say home consoles, if it's still a ways off, and they're wondering, is this going to be cross-gen and it'll be on PS6 or their handheld or something? So it's hard to say there. But either way, .hack 0 has been announced, 10 years in the making. And this becomes quite interesting because CyberConnect 2, they must be saving up. It's self-planned, developed, and published with permission from intellectual property holder Bandai Namco. As in, this is all CyberConnect 2. That was a little surprising. Okay, so get this. In an interview with Famitsu, CyberConnect 2 CEO said the title, .hack 0, reflects the messaging of restarting .hack from zero. It has no connection to the .hack 0 light novel series, so it seems like you can just kind of, I guess, jump into this completely and just start from scratch. I mean, I guess that's why .hack 0. The story, set roughly 10 years in the future, will once again center around the in-game MMORPG The World, but with a greater focus on real-world drama. While previous entries in the .hack series were limited in their depictions of the real world to emails and web browsers due to budget and publisher constraints, no such constraints will exist for .hack 0. So this seems like it will have more of an emphasis on the real world side, maybe where you'll jump between the world, the digital side, the MMORPG, but then also run around or walk around or do different things in a social side with the real world. This seems like a pretty big undertaking for CyberConnect 2, but I really like that they seem to be going almost all in. I mean, they're doing everything. They're publishing it, they're developing it, they're marketing the whole thing. So again, exciting stuff for .hack fans. The thing I would really like to see, though, is Bandai Namco maybe become more interested in trying to do a collection, a remastering, even where they can take the original .hack games that are still just left on the PS2, the 4 games, move them up like they did with GU, and just on a single disc or cartridge even for current platforms. I think that'd be awesome, but at least there's something here for .hack fans to look forward to. Again, probably going to be a while, but I'm very curious to see where CyberConnect 2 takes this whole thing with what they're saying right now about .hack 0. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy, which has now gone fully multi-platform as we're waiting for Rebirth to come out here in a few months. But we're also expecting them to show off the third game, the final game in the trilogy, and yes, that should be multi-platform day one. The way it's all being talked about right now, it's pretty straightforward. But there was a recent interview, and I want to go over this real quick, actually, because it's quite interesting from, well, let's be a programmer's perspective. Yeah, the director on Final Fantasy VII Remake currently. And we can see this. This is over on Automaton Media, speaking with Naoki Hamaguchi, who does come from the programming side, working with some of the previous Final Fantasy games. I remember Final Fantasy 13 is working with that trilogy there. But when Final Fantasy VII Rebirth launched, there was talk about how the PC version looked better than the PS5 version, and our philosophy will not change for the third installment. As our fundamental principle, we do not design assets to meet the lowest baseline. Instead, we create them for the high-end environments first. We then apply what we call reduction, adjusting assets and tuning them appropriately for each platform. This means that we avoid negatively impacting high-spec platforms. This isn't unique to us either. I believe it's become fairly common practice among developers in recent years. Speaking in purely technical terms, we categorize PS5 and PS5 Pro as mid-range platforms internally. Compared to high-end PCs, texture sizes may differ by roughly 1.5 to 2 times, mesh loading by 1.5 to 2 times, and polygon counts by more than 3 times. That's how big the difference can be. Conversely, among currently supported systems, the one adjusted towards lower specifications is the Steam Deck, since it operates at less than half the PS5's baseline. Therefore, I'd like to once again say that supporting multiple platforms does not impact overall quality, and this is something I see thrown around. It's like, hey, if you have the game operational on the Steam Deck or the Switch or Switch 2 or whatever, it's going to affect the high end with the PC and the person with the 4090 or 50, whatever, right? Well, in this case, it seems like the target hardware when it comes to Square with their Final Fantasy VII trilogy is PC, and then they as they say, use reduction and get it down to some of the other platforms. And this was actually a really, really interesting interview because it basically just dove into all of that. I mean, Hamaguchi goes crazy and breaks down everything about development with these games and getting it onto all these different platforms. Again, new strategy here for Square Enix, but I think a correct one. And I think this is something that will really propel the final game in the trilogy to probably be the best-selling one. And on top of that, let's face it, once they get that third one out, I mean, they're going to move these games, probably in a compilation, a trilogy pack, to the next generation platforms. They'll probably re-release them again as much as they can, and yeah, probably sell pretty well. Big collector's edition for hundreds of dollars. I'm sure there are many Final Fantasy fans out there that'll probably bite on that one. But either way, interesting interview. I wanted to point it out. It's linked down below in the sources. Definitely check it out. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, How much do you think the standard version of Grand Theft Auto 6 will cost? That being in US dollars. $80 was the leading vote getter here. 50%. Wow. $100 or more is 18%. Shoot, that's crazy. $70 or less at 19%. And then the very oddly priced $90 came in at 13%. I am still thinking it's going to be $80. I mean, we've already seen $80 be at least attempted by Mario Kart World, and we saw Outer Worlds 2 pull back on that. But outside of this, I mean, think about all like the early versions of games that come out and they're $10 to $20 more, so they are typically $80 to $90. And those still sell. I mean, they do well enough. If it's a big enough IP or franchise that people are willing to spend money on to get 48 hours access to. So if Grand Theft Auto showed up, 6, and they said, you get 72 hours of early access, but it's $120. I will tell you now, the numbers would still be crazy. Number one across the board on Xbox, PlayStation. If they did something similar on Steam, you'd see some crazy concurrent player count number. So they know they can obviously get a bunch of money from each like individual people. I'm more curious about their strategy when it comes to the online side, because that's going to be very important for them to have a large number of people have the game, so they continue to dump hours and, yes, tons of extra money through microtransactions into their like shark cards and stuff for the multiplayer side. So they're going to walk a fine line here with this, but my expectation at this point is an $80 price tag for Grand Theft Auto 6 when it launches in November. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Freedan, who says, I suspect on Saturday, Nintendo will send out a post on their Today app mentioning the anniversary and maybe saying they're looking forward to the movie and sharing more information about the franchise later in the year. I'm not very good about checking the app, the Nintendo Today app. I find out what's on the Nintendo Today app when people mention it on social media, or I get messages about it. That's really it. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. I do have that on my phone. And I know Nintendo is still trying really hard to get people to look at that application and use it. But let's face it, I think the majority of people find out about this stuff just on social media still, whether it's on X or Facebook or Instagram or wherever. So Nintendo, they still have an uphill battle or uphill climb with that application. But that wouldn't shock me, you're right, if they just said, hey, here's a cool wallpaper for your phone for the Legend of Zelda. And it's like all the different links from the different eras and 30th or 40th anniversary or whatever right there at the top. And that's it. That honestly, that might be all they have for now, because they are looking at Mario currently as the big thing to show off with the movie coming up. But later this year, I'm sure they'll have more to say when it comes to the movie with The Legend of Zelda in 2027, and yeah, probably some games. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card, or maybe you want to check out an unboxing for the Virtual Boy on the Switch. Mine came in yesterday, and I did a whole video just doing an unboxing on it to check it out, and I'll leave that right below. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.